This animal is part goat and part sheep. It's created by mixing the cells of separate embryos and implanting that embryo into a surrogate mother. Today we'll go into genetics, which is the branch of biology in which you study heredity and how traits are passed on. As we study genetics, we'll look at the methods of reproduction, the process of meiosis, and how mutations occur. Reproduction occurs in two ways. You have sexual reproduction, which means you join an egg and a sperm to produce a unique individual. Or you could have asexual reproduction, as in the case of binary fission, which is carried out by bacteria, to produce an exact clone of the parent. To compare and contrast, during sexual reproduction, you're joining the gametes of two parents, and you're basically mixing the two genes together to make one unique individual. During asexual reproduction, the parent simply just makes a copy of itself so that the offspring are genetically identical to the parent. Binary fission is an example of asexual reproduction, and this occurs in prokaryotes like bacteria, and the results are very similar to mitosis, in which you divide the contents of your genes into two different cells. And of course, there are advantages and disadvantages to each type of reproduction. For example, in environments that are unchanging, asexual reproduction might be better because the species are more well adapted to producing efficiently. In environments that are changing, sexual reproduction might be better because it allows for genetic diversity and it improves the chances of survival. For example, populations of moth that couldn't blend into their environment were eventually hunted off by predators and their numbers went away. However, populations of moths that could camouflage into tree bark had higher chances of survival, and they were able to pass on their genes to offspring. To understand how traits are passed on, you have to know that there are two types of cells. You have somatic cells, which make up your tissues and organs, and you have gametes, which would be like sperm and egg, that carry genes in the form of chromosomes, and these are passed down from generation to generation. Humans have 23 pairs of homologous chromosomes, which means they inherit one copy from mom and one copy from dad. Pairs 1 through 22 are known as the autosomes, and these control typical traits such as skin color, eye color, hair texture, and so on. Pair number 23 is known as the sex chromosomes, and if you inherit two copies of the X chromosome, that will make you a female, and if you inherit an XY, then that makes you a male. Trisomy 21 occurs when you inherit three copies of chromosome 21, which results in Down syndrome. So as you can see, Down syndrome is the result of not having the right number of chromosomes. So as we move further into this topic, it's important that you understand that body cells are diploid, which means you get two copies, and gametes are haploid, which means you only have one copy. So when you combine two gametes, for example like a sperm and an egg, you end up with an individual that is now diploid. Haploid sex cells are created in the process of meiosis. Meiosis is just basically mitosis, which occurs twice. Mitosis results in diploid cells, whereas meiosis creates gametes like sperm and egg, which are haploid. If you haven't done so already, make sure you watch the mitosis video that I created so that you have a better understanding of the stages of meiosis. But meiosis is just basically mitosis, which occurs twice. There's still prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase. It's the same process, but it just occurs twice in a row. So that's how you're able to trim a diploid cell into a haploid gamete cell like a sperm or an egg. When you combine meiosis 1 and meiosis 2, you get gametogenesis, which is the production of mature gametes. Gametogenesis will slightly differ between the sexes. Males will produce 4 sperm cells, whereas females will produce 1 large egg along with 3 smaller polar bodies that are eventually broken down. So to summarize, there are two types of reproduction. You have sexual and asexual reproduction, which each have their own advantages and disadvantages. Genes are passed on through chromosomes. Somatic cells or body cells are diploid, which means they have 2 copies of the chromosomes, whereas gametes or sex cells are haploid, which means they only have 1 copy of the chromosome. Gametes are created during meiosis. Alright guys, I hope that was informative and you learned a little bit about genetics. In part 2, we'll look at Gregory Mendel and how he used pea plants to study the inheritance of traits. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time on Win Biology.